Okay. Several of your works have been adapted for film. Could you tell us what you think is the most interesting part of that process?
Depends how you mean interesting. You know, hanging around with movie stars is always fun, and a lot of them are very interesting people. So, you know, that part is, you know, always amusing. Watching a film get made is, well, some people say it's like watching paint dry because, you know, they shoot a scene, then they shoot it again, then they shoot it again, then they shoot it again. Then they turn the camera around, they shoot it again, they shoot it again, they shoot it again. But, you know, I am impressed with the extraordinary energy that goes into it and, you know, so many people combining toward, you know, that one purpose. So those are the sort of highlights to me.
As the novelist, what role do you play when your book is adapted to film?
To keep as polite a distance as possible. I would say that at the level of the director and the screenwriter and often the actors, there is healthy respect for the novelist as another creative person. But they really do not want you telling them their business. And if you think about it, you know, I've had one occasion where a book of mine was sold in manuscript, and the producer-director, who's actually become a dear friend, but he decided to give me advice about the book, and I was like, hey, you know, you can change whatever you want when it's a movie, but this is my book, leave me alone. So I don't blame them for feeling exactly the same way.
Okay. Well, speaking of adaptations, your first book, 1L, was adapted from your personal journal.
Right.
So I was curious, was it your plan all along to write a book as you were journaling, or did something later inspire you to turn that journal into a book?
No, I went to law school with a contract to write that book through a really bizarre set of circumstances. I had been a writing fellow and then a teacher at Stanford. And I had written a novel that had gone unpublished, and I had this crusty New York agent, and I was afraid of her. And I was reluctant to write her and tell her that I was going to law school. So in the middle of this letter, because I don't want to call her, I said, you know, there's not a good nonfiction book about what it's like to be a law student. I really was not proposing that I write that book. But she misinterpreted the letter and showed it to an editor, and I ended up with a contract to write what became 1L.
Now, I had read some of your Kendall County series before I read 1L, and I was delighted to see Sandy Stern make an appearance in both your memoir and in your fiction books. So I was kind of wondering, what was it about the real Sandy that inspired you to make him a reoccurring character?
I have to confess, first of all, you're very astute to notice that correspondence. It is purely the fact that I liked the name that caused one character in 1L to be named Sandy Stern, and for him then to turn up for that, what I intended to be an entirely different character in the fiction. And the book had already been sold, the novel Presumed Innocent, when my editor, John Galassi, called me up and said, you realize you got a character named Sandy Stern in 1L too? And I had completely forgotten, and I think we just both thought it was so amusing that we let it stay there. I didn't want to change the name in the novel, in Presumed Innocent, because, you know, I'd gone through sort of backflips getting there. The character was initially Stein, and now that wasn't right, and so I'd gotten to Stern, and you know, then he'd been Alejandro, and his desire to Americanize himself, he'd ended up as Sandy. So we decided that was too well thought out to change again. So bottom line, it's purely a coincidence.
So they're not the same Sandy Stern?
They are not the same person. the same imaginary person. The first one, of course, is based on a real law school classmate of mine whose name I changed in order to protect his privacy.
Now, in 1L, like you mentioned, you changed people's names, changed some identifying characteristics, but surely people knew who they were in the book. What kind of reaction did you get from your classmates and professors?
Well, the people who thought they were favorably portrayed thought that 1L was a discerning literary work of high order. And people who didn't think they were favorably portrayed had other opinions. So naturally, the professor who thought he was the model for the heavy of 1L, Rudolph Perini, was the angriest person of all. And he was angry enough that I decided that 1L, through another long story, too long to explain, ended up being published while I was still a student on campus. And after I experienced that professor's reaction, I decided it was a good idea for me to get off campus, and I spent my last semester as a intern in the Boston District Attorney's Office.
So you're here to speak on Oklahoma State University's campus, and while we don't have a law school, we actually have a very large pre-law program. I was wondering what advice you might have for our students who are interested in a career in law.
You know, I'm very enthusiastic about a legal education. It's a tough time in the law right now because the job market has been very crowded, and the contraction of the American legal profession is probably going to continue due to various efficiencies, including the fact that somebody in India who's had a legal education can do the research on some questions just as well as somebody in the United States, and of course they'll do it for a quarter the price. And law firms have been contracting a little bit. Clients have been getting more sophisticated, and they don't really like paying for 4 lawyers to do the job that one can and probably should be doing. But overall, I still think that there is always a place in the world for a good lawyer. And I also think that a legal education can prepare you to do a lot of different things. And it's good for career in business if that's where you want to go. Real estate developer. My agents in Hollywood are all lawyers. They've all been trained as lawyers first. There's a million different directions you can go in with a legal education. Adrian, who I live with, was a lawyer for a while. She now works as an advisor to private foundations. So you really can do a lot of different things with a legal education. I think it's a good idea.